Hey guys, this is Connor with Conquest HP, and this video is it's for gun owners and non-gun owners alike. I'm just going to address some statistical misunderstandings that I think both sides need to understand in this debate. I'm sure a lot of gun owners actually have already looked at these stats, but I think they're worth reiterating. So these are all pulled from CBC and they're getting their stats directly from Stats Canada. The first thing I want to talk about is like there's this misconception that gun crime and guns are in some way special. That guns are obviously they're obviously can be used to kill people, but they're not alone in that. You can use just about anything to kill people, as we've seen in kind of recent years in Canada. I mean, there's machete attacks are on the rise. The Toronto van attack was obviously a tragic thing. So people get this idea in their head that guns alone are the dangerous, the threat to the average Canadian, and it's just not true. So if you look at the last 2 decades of data, and CBC has a very convenient chart that I will link to link to in the description below. But over the last 2 decades, they compare shooting deaths to stabbing deaths to beating deaths per 100,000 population. You might expect that, well, obviously shooting should be accounting for most of that, but there are multiple years over this 2 decade span where there are more stabbing deaths than there are shooting deaths. Multiple years. Just off the top of my head, I'm looking at 2016. I'm looking at 2005. I'm looking at 2001, 2000, 1999. I'm looking at 1997. There's a lot. So this idea, like, if you really think that guns are that dangerous, a knife, a stabbing, like that, a simple weapon like a knife is responsible for more deaths than shooting in multiple of these years in the last 2 decades. Like, most gun owners, I think, don't understand this. And if you want to ban something, does that mean you also ban knives? You make that argument that, well, you only have guns for shooting and knives you use for other things, but you use a gun to feed your family, use a gun for sport, use a gun for all kinds of different things that have nothing to do with killing people. So when you actually look at the deaths per 100,000 population, stabbings are as much or more of a problem in a lot of these recent years. Uh, the other line beneath this one is for beating, because people are beaten to death in Canada every year. Uh, this is actually not that much lower than stabbing and shooting in a lot of the years. Surprisingly. So, just to give you an example, in 2016, the per 100,000 deaths from shooting was 0.6, for stabbing was 0.5, and for beating was 0.35 approximately. That's not that big of a difference. And we're talking about someone being beaten to death. Was that hands? Is that just an object you can find to use for leverage? I mean, there's nothing to ban there. The problem here is that there's violence. There's illegal violence taking place. That's what you would want to stop. It's not that there's anything specifically bad about guns in and of themselves. And if you want to make the case that they're more deadly than those other things, the stats just really don't back it up a lot of the years, because knives and other stabbing objects are more deadly in some of those years. So let me just scroll down for a second here. It's another important graph we have, some fun stuff. So another big part is, you'll often see in this gun debate that the total number of deaths are thrown around, total number of deaths by firearm. And you can't really, I don't think you can really accurately use that number, and here's why. If you look at here, I'm just going to read it directly from CBC Stats Canada. Canadian firearm deaths by intent 2000 to 2016. That's the years 2000 to 2016, obviously. 75% of the deaths, the gun deaths in that period, in that 16-year period, were from suicide. 75%. That's an astounding number. If you just count all gun deaths in that same category, suicide is going to make up a significant portion of them, a massive portion of those deaths. Now, that's not really, that's not a gun question. I just had it pulled up, but I think I closed it. looking at the stats on suicide by method in Canada, and I think it said that suicide by method in Canada, guns are responsible for something like 13% of suicide deaths. Uh, Poisoning and strangulation are far and away above the rate of using guns for suicide. So even to make the argument that suicide is somehow easier with a gun, it just, the numbers don't really bear that out. That's not what most people do. And even if you were to make that argument, I think the real argument there is it's a mental health issue, right? I mean, like if people want to, and maybe there's an ideological thing going on there too, right? It's suicide is that person's choice, and maybe it's tragic, and maybe we should try to be preventing those tragedies. But that has nothing to do with guns. A person that wants to commit suicide poisons themselves and strangles themselves far more often than they shoot themselves. Nothing to do with guns. So if you want to have that talk, I think that's also a more valuable talk to have. How do we reduce the suicides is probably a good idea. Like, where are these coming from in the first place? What are the mental health issues leading up to this? How can we nip this in the bud before before people get to that point where they're suicidal? But really, there's nothing to do. Like, the guns don't have much to do with that. The majority of those gun deaths are from suicides, and even that majority is a small percentage of total suicides. So I think non-gun owners need to just understand these stats a little bit, because these gross numbers get thrown around, like the total number of gun deaths, and the rate of violence per 100,000. But when you put them in perspective, it really clarifies the topic a little bit. And you want to be more specific with what you're actually getting rid of, what you're actually banning, because I think gun owners and non-gun owners could kind of come together on this and say that maybe, suicide is a problem. We should figure out what to do about people who are suicidal. We should figure out what they need, how we can help them. If we need to have that discussion. That doesn't have to be a gun discussion. We need to figure out what's leading to violent crime in Canada, because, as the stats show, people are going to commit violent crime. It's going to happen. They're going to do it with a brick or a machete, or they're going to do it with a gun or a knife or whatever. And the fact that guns are often outweighed by knives in terms of the stats, that should tell us quite a bit. People are going to commit violent crime, and we'd be better served by trying to figure out what's leading up to that violent crime. How can we prevent violent crimes? If it's obviously it's criminal activity, but I mean, if it's coming from gang violence, as it often is in Canada, let's figure out how to deal with that instead of taking away guns from legal and responsible owners. So those are just a few points for non-gun owners primarily. I've been really happy to see a lot of comments on the other gun debate, gun ban videos I've done, and really impressed by some of the comments that I've had from gun advocates. I mean, you guys are you're very well thought out in your arguments, very well researched, and it's just been really impressive to see. So thanks for watching. I'll definitely do some more videos along this topic, because I think these these misunderstandings are toxic. I mean, I think we need to have debates about these things and talk about where these deaths are coming from and where this violence is coming from. But I think we need to be precise about what we're talking about. We can't just ban an entire class of things for legal owners that has nothing to do with with the actual problem. And unfortunately, that's what our would-be leaders are proposing. So we need to do better with that. Anyways, hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I will talk to you guys again soon.